Let us delve into the ethical and legal conundrum that is this case. Ezra's decision to implement an emergency examination authority on Odessa is a dramatically pivotal action. An action which would detain Odessa, forcing her to undergo involuntary assessment, stripping her of her liberty. If this action were determined to be unnecessary, it could place Ezra in hot water over the trauma it caused Odessa. So, let us press pause here and break down whether Odessa really qualifies for an EEA and whether her age holds any weight over her freedom to make decisions. First, let's look at the facts surrounding EEAs. The Queensland Public Health Act states that for a person to qualify for an involuntary EEA, they must be behaving in a way which suggests that they are at imminent risk of causing self-harm, that this behaviour stems from a disturbance in mental capacity, and that the person requires urgent assessment. Thus, to be detained, Odessa must have a detrimental mental condition or illness. The Queensland Mental Health Act defines mental illness as a condition characterised by a clinically significant disturbance of thought, mood, perception, or memory. Due to the broadness of this definition, it can be argued that hypoglycemia, in this circumstance, fulfills the criteria outlined in the Mental Health Act due to the condition's ability to cause neurological impairment. However, the Mental Health Act also states that the decision that someone has a mental illness must be aligned with internationally accepted medical standards. Medical clearance is the accepted method which would decide whether Odessa's presentation is medical or psychiatric. Since the disturbance to mental capacity has been caused by the complication of an organic condition, then the disturbance would likely not be deemed a mental illness. Now you ask, where does this leave her capacity to make an informed decision? It is recognised that cognitive capacity is not a fixed state. Rather, it is transient and subject to change with an individual's neurological status. The case study mentions that Odessa's condition improves following the administration of oral glucose. Therefore, her decision to refuse treatment is of clear mind. However, the importance of her errands outweighs her perceived risk of not being transported. Therefore, this raises questions about her education surrounding her newly diagnosed diabetes. Since Odessa is under 18, she is considered a minor by Queensland legislation. Thus, her capacity to make an informed health decision can be tested against Gillick competency. Gillick competency is an exception that allows minors to make decisions about their healthcare. An important part of the Gillick competency test is to assess if Odessa understands her conditions and the consequences of refusing treatment. She does not demonstrate this in the case study, but with education from Ezra, she would then be able to make a decision with the potential consequences in mind. Additionally, due to the fact that she is close to reaching the legal age of adulthood, she can be deemed Gillick competent. The Queensland Guardianship and Administration Act provides a legal rationale for how a patient should be treated, with a balance between providing the best possible healthcare and taking into account the patient's wishes. Additionally, as Odessa is legally a minor, the rationale for treating a child is also implicated in this situation, with the Queensland Public Guardian Act. The Act outlines how any person advocating for a child must take into account the views and wishes expressed by the child. For a person to have legal capacity to make decisions, they must show that they are capable of understanding the following. Odessa satisfies some of these criteria, as she is aware of her illness and its management. It could be argued that Odessa does not understand the risks of refusing further treatment, as she prioritises completing her errands over transport to hospital. However, she made this decision once she had recovered. She therefore made this decision with a clear mind and the capacity to do so, and the fact that the paramedics do not agree with her decision does not meet the requirement for an EEA. The QAS-CPG also stipulates circumstances in which a person can be treated involuntarily under the Mental Health Act. However, these criteria are almost identical to what has already been covered and deemed not applicable to Odessa. Another point of legal contention in this case is that an EEA can only be performed if there is no other, less restrictive means to provide the treatment as outlined in the Mental Health Act. Odessa's current condition and mental capacity show that there is no need to restrict her liberty in order to give treatment. She is of sound mind and body and can receive further care in a number of less restrictive ways if she so chooses. Although Odessa's decision carries risks if she were to become hypoglycemic again, it is her legal right to make this decision. In her conversation with the paramedics, she has proven she understands her illness and the necessity to eat food with insulin, and as such has shown a level of understanding that constitutes capacity. Ezra's decision to utilise an EEA is, although a vague area of law and regulation, unsuitable and inappropriate in this situation. Neither Ezra or Odessa's conflicting decisions are without inherent risk, and both are generally flawed. However, they are also supported by conflicting ethical theories and values. The bioethical principles of justice, specifically rights-based and legal justice, and autonomy, support Odessa's personal freedoms and her right to refuse treatment. In contrast, however, the ethical principles of deontology and, tentatively, beneficence and non-maleficence support the notion that Ezra has a duty and responsibility to look after his patient's health and well-being. Due to the opposing nature of Ezra and Odessa's equally understandable goals, the most morally sound, beneficial, and ethical approach to this case is to blend both the patient and the paramedic's desires into a mutually agreeable plan of action. Odessa has the right, as an autonomous citizen, and the legitimate legal power to dictate what medical treatment she wishes to receive, so long as she has capacity. Unless she can be proven to have impaired capacity, not just a lack of knowledge and understanding of her medical condition, then she has every right to determine her own future, and it would be grossly unethical to try and infringe upon her freedoms by forcing her to go to hospital under an EEA. There is also a very strong chance that this hypothetical EEA would be deemed illegal, in addition to being amoral, due to the fact that it would deprive Odessa of her liberty without due reason. Therefore, Ezra cannot ethically or legally perform an EEA simply because he disagrees with Odessa's choices. Whilst this means that the ethical theories of justice and autonomy currently support Odessa's position, if Ezra is willing to invest more time and effort into his communication with his patient, he could very well change her mind and have her willingly accept further treatment. If he explains the potential consequences of Odessa's poorly managed diabetes in more depth, or perhaps offers her an alternative solution to completing her urgent errands, then the bioethics of justice and autonomy would support his actions, as Odessa would agree to further treatment on her own volition. Supplementary to this is Ezra's position and the ethical theories of deontology, beneficence, and non-maleficence. As the treating QAS paramedic, Ezra has a duty of care, an overarching obligation to Odessa and the public as a whole. He is duty-bound to try and manage his patients' health and well-being to the extent of his abilities, whilst also ensuring their safety and that of the public. This deontological responsibility gives weight to Ezra's desire to EEA Odessa, for even if she doesn't want treatment, Ezra has a duty to ensure that she has received adequate medical attention so that she is no longer personally in danger or at risk of harming others. The bioethics of beneficence and non-maleficence also support Ezra's wish to conduct an EEA. If Odessa is not willingly or capable to look after her own healthcare needs, Ezra is ethically justified in forcing her to receive treatment as it is for her own benefit and well-being, and ignoring the issue of her poorly managed diabetes would be negligent and breaking the standards of non-maleficence. At the end of the day, we have to ask ourselves the question, in this scenario, is utilising the all-powerful EEA for Odessa's safety, or is it just more convenient for Ezra? If we are to be frank, there are many less restrictive ways of ensuring Odessa's health needs are met, and the EEA is favoured out of mere convenience. This was determined by testing relevant ethical theories and legal resources against the case. Ultimately, Odessa can be seen as Gillick competent, and she can consent to the healthcare if she wishes. With education of the possible consequences of her condition, she would ideally consent to hospital transport. However, it is also acceptable that she be transported home, be made an appropriate meal, become educated on the symptoms of hypoglycemia and diabetes, and develop an appropriate action plan for the future.